and welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time. I am your host, Maureen Perrault, and I invite you to join me as I travel back in time to relive some of the greatest episodes of television. On each episode of this podcast, I chat with someone who worked on the shows that we discuss. Writers, directors, crew members, actors, you name it. They are here to talk about what makes great TV and to tell us about the behind the scenes of the episodes they were involved in. Now, this second episode of Once Upon a TV Time is about a show that broke all kinds of records, was watched by millions of people worldwide, and delivered many great episodes of television. A modest little show called Game of Thrones. But which episode can we possibly be talking about today? There were so many good ones over the course of the 8 seasons that made up this HBO series created by D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, based on the book series by George R.R. Martin. Well, I say we go back to one that many critics called a masterpiece. It aired on June 19th, 2016, and went on to win an Emmy for Outstanding Directing and Outstanding Writing that year. It features an enormous battle that took 25 days to film. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the 9th episode of Season 6, titled Battle of the Bastards.
Come, bastard. You don't have the men, you don't have the horses, and you don't have Winterfell. Why lead those poor souls into slaughter? There's no need for a battle. Get off your horse. Kneel. I'm a man of mercy.
You're right. There's no need for a battle. Thousands of men don't need to die. Only one of us. Let's end this the old way. You against me.
Now, I could spend hours talking about what makes this episode great and how it was one of the best things the show ever did, but we're going to focus on the battle sequence itself because that's actually what makes this episode so iconic. And here to talk all things Battle of the Bastards with me today is Jonathan Cohen, who worked as a stunt performer on the show. Jonathan, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
So now, before we even dive into what it was like to film this episode of Game of Thrones, let's talk about your career in a little bit. So you've been a stunt performer for 30 years. And not only did you appear in 28 episodes of Game of Thrones, but you've also worked on major motion pictures like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, The Dark Knight Rises, Avengers Age of Ultron, The Last Indiana Jones, and even House of the Dragon. So tell me, how did you become a stunt performer?
So my late father was in the industry. He was actually a director in the 70s. And one day I met a colleague of his who gave me a job as a runner at the studio, actually in Shepperton and Elstree as well. And then while I was working, I met a legendary stuntman called Rocky Taylor. Rocky was known for his work on the Death Wish films, you know, the Michael Winner Death Wish movies and many other things. But I met Rocky, and Rocky just said to me, you know, if I was looking for potential ways to get more into the industry, why not consider stunts? And that was it.
Was there anything specifically about stunts that was appealing to you?
I think to begin with, it was really just the challenge of getting the qualifications to get onto the stunt register. Because, you know, as you probably know, the UK has quite a specific set of, if you like, credentials that you need to be included into the register. You know, I was doing different sports anyway, and I liked the idea of having to train in these different fields that were perhaps new to me. And, you know, the challenge of getting through that, being accepted onto the stunt register was a goal. Beyond that, I didn't really know where it was going to go.
So what are some of those qualifications that people need to be able to get a job in stunts?
It's varied slightly over the years, but the way it works is you need 6 different skills. Each one needs to be of a certain level. So, for example, a fighting category, which could be, you know, I don't know, taekwondo or judo or something like that, which needs to be brown belt or above. And then there'd be the equivalent in everything from swimming and water skills through to driving, horse riding, fencing, gymnastics, highboard diving. There's a lot of different options that people can choose, and then out of each option, they need to have shown that they've applied themselves to a high level to demonstrate that they've achieved a high level in each one.
And when we look at stunt work in film or in TV, whether it is simple in a simple drama or a high profile action movie, one can't help but wonder if to be a stunt performer, there's a requirement for a certain degree of fearlessness or recklessness.
No, it's a myth. Okay, let's look at the second one first, if you don't mind. Like recklessness, definitely not. A reckless stunt performer is dangerous to themselves and the rest of the crew and probably won't last very long.
Yeah.
I associate recklessness with a little bit, maybe just gung-ho, jump down a big hole and just see what will happen. It's not like that. There's a lot of planning, research, testing going into what we do. And really, you need to remember, from the smallest stunt to the biggest stunt, our main goal is to keep it safe. You see what I mean? So sure, it's great if we get the audience to jump out their seats in excitement. But, that's the magic of film, isn't it? We need to do it in such a way that everybody goes home that night to eat ice cream and have a beer and do what they want to do. Safety is number one.
And it definitely is, like you said, like a myth. There is this idea when we as viewer watch film or TV and we see those stunts, like it looks so real that we think, oh, these people must be crazy. They must have no fear. They must have something in their mind that goes, I'll do whatever. But in fact, like you said, it's all about safety. It's all about making it look insane, but it actually is extremely safe.
And I mean, it's a funny thing what people think about fear, isn't it? I mean, you could do a whole podcast on fear, but in a sense, it's yes, to put yourself in a situation that is potentially scary, but to have prepared well enough so that the risks are as minimal as possible. Sure, there's going to be adrenaline if you're crashing a car or catching fire or, falling off a building. Sure, there's an element of excitement and adrenaline, but fear is such an interesting thing, and it can be controlled. I think in everyday life, people that maybe do karate and then one day do their first competition, like the fear that they experience could be enormous. But again, it's a controlled situation, and with experience of repetition, doing something again and again and understanding it as well as possible, that fear becomes a much more controlled thing. A little bit of fear is healthy.
Yes, I would say so.
I think if you have no fear, then it's scary. It's a little bit like being able to hit your thumb with a hammer and then you don't feel any pain. That to me seems like that could lead you into trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, and it goes back to what we said about recklessness. Like, if you have no fear, then you're becoming reckless, and then that's when you become dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to bear in mind that the fear isn't only, I don't know, being hit by a car on the job, as a stunt. The fear is just the fact that you get the timing right, that you do a professional job so that they don't need to reshoot it because you made a mistake. You see what I mean? So there's other aspects to the fear thing, which just mean, again, it's I would describe it more as adrenaline. You want to stay focused, you want to take a deep breath and just make sure you have everything rehearsed and played through in your mind enough times that it's going to just go as smoothly as possible.
And speaking of rehearsing and preparing, you've also worked as a stunt coordinator on various productions like the show Killing Eve.
Yeah.
What does that role involve, and how does it fit into the wheel of filmmaking?
The stunt coordinating is quite a different job from being a stunt performer or stunt actor. Pretty much the difference is that you would get involved in the production a lot earlier than if you're just a stunt performer, for the simple reason that you need to be involved in going to look at locations, discussions about the content of the script, discussions about the cost of the actual action sequences that the director may have in his mind or her mind. The things like, I mean, it's so spread across the different departments, even in as much as, well, okay, so we'd like to see this actor, yeah, I don't know, trip over and fall down the stairs. Okay, so how are we going to do that? And what costume are they wearing? So then we have to discuss with the costume department, is it practical for a lady to do this in high heels? Maybe not. Is there a way we can shoot it in such a way that we don't need to see her feet, so the heels aren't an issue? It's so multifaceted. Once you start a job as a stunt coordinator, yeah, I think you need to be prepared that the phone may ring at odd times of the day or night with some random persons. Suddenly they've thought of a question and like, oh, what about if this happens? Well, that happens, and but that's part of the job.
So how did you end up working on Game of Thrones?
I got a call from the stunt coordinator to come in and be a performer. It's as simple as that. I had Game of Thrones changed stunt coordinators about halfway through the production. I started off doing Game of Thrones in the second season with a stunt coordinator called Paul Herbert. And then halfway through, Paul went off to do something else, and a stunt coordinator by the name of Rowley Earlham came in, and Rowley saw it through from I think around about season 4, maybe, or 5, I forget, right the way through to the end. Fortunately, he kept me with him as well. So, and I think I was originally called in by the second coordinator, by Rowley, because he wanted me to double an actor. So some of the time I was doing generic stunts. So I was just, a guy in costume doing whatever stunts were required. And then other times, actually on Battle of the Bastards, I doubled 2 actors. But really what that meant was being kind of on standby for some of it, so that we would rehearse each person's sequence. And then so long as we felt the actor was happy and competent to, carry out that sequence, then really I just needed to be there in case something happened.
Who did you stunt double for?
So I doubled for Christoph, who was
Tormund.
Yeah, thank you. Tormund. Yeah, and I doubled Christoph right the way through the show. So that was nice because it just meant that sometimes I would come. I mean, he's very capable. He's a physical actor. So he's very capable of doing a lot of the action sequences and fight routines and that kind of thing. But I guess for him it was useful having me there as well. Maybe to to do pickups of certain scenes. And I also doubled a character called Small John on Battle of the Bastards. From memory, he was in just for that battle, as far as I remember. I also doubled a character called Bronn on the show quite a lot, who was an actor called Jerome Flynn. He was cool, actually. He was quite a nice character to double because he was quite a cool character in the show, which is always nice. And he didn't have like an enormous beard like Christoph had, so I didn't need to have a huge beard stuck on when I doubled Jerome.
Minimal makeup time.
Minimum fuss. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say the only advantage, because on Game of Thrones we had enormous amounts of prosthetics and makeup and all sorts of things. Not so much for Battle of the Bastards, but once we got into all the White Walker stuff later on, and we would be getting into work like 4 hours early to be made ready to go on set. So, oh my God, it was exhausting.
I bet. So Battle of the Bastards is a pivotal episode of the series because the battle for Winterfell that it features is the first large-scale pitch battle that we see on the show. So it's a massive undertaking to get that to the screen. The battle sequence reportedly took 25 days to film. And it involved 500 extras,
Mhm.
600 crew members, 80 horses, and more than 25
Mhm.
stunt women and men. So, what was it like to be part of such a huge endeavor?
You know, Game of Thrones was an interesting one. I almost feel like I don't think people realized quite how big it was,
Mhm.
even when we were there. It was like a movie. It was like a big budget movie. Everything about it was big. Seeing the scale of the sets, the amount of people working on it, the amount of cameras on the action, the amount of stunts that we were allowed to do. And when I say allowed to do, because, sometimes budget dictates that we have to do less stunts, even though we'd like to do more stunts,
Mhm.
But, pretty much Rowley was the stunt coordinator. Rowley was able to create, some amazing gags, some amazing sequences, and just pretty much have free reign to allow us to make that battle into what it became.
How do you prepare
Yeah.
physically and mentally to shoot for a shoot like that? Because, like I said, it was 25 days for a single sequence when usually most TV dramas shoot an entire episode in 8 to 12 days.
Personally, I just think, it's going to be a tough few weeks. It's a very physical few weeks. In Northern Ireland, you're really exposed to the elements for real. They get every season, you can imagine, each day. A lot of rain, a lot of wind, all those kind of things, which makes it physically can be quite tough. Working in big, heavy costumes that are often wet with horses and swords, and you knew it was going to be a tough few weeks, but it was also an exciting few weeks because we really wanted to make something special. So I guess in terms of preparing, just be as healthy as you can be, try and catch up on as much sleep as you can, and just go in there with a positive view of each day of work. I
Yeah.
mean, you're tired, that's unavoidable. Everybody was tired, but that goes with the job,
I mean, in one way, it
you know?
helps you perform too, because your characters are tired.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from a kind of acting point of view, yeah, everybody is supposed to be like battle worn and weary, aren't they?
What was the atmosphere on set as you worked on this battle sequence? Because it seems like you said, such an immersive experience with all of those extras, those people in costumes, the horses, the giant piles of bodies everywhere.
The extras on Game of Thrones are amazing because most of them they look like that all year round. Like there's like a special crew of Northern Ireland, guys and girls that just
Yeah.
love Game of Thrones, and they were so enthusiastic and motivated and kind of just positive to be there. So
Mm-hmm.
that in itself was nice, and that kind of thing helps. And again, from the stunt team, it was just, we had a very driven stunt coordinator who wanted to get the best out of us and was kind of motivating us to push forwards, and kind of, in a way, it's almost like going into battle because everybody starts off the sequence with their kind of pep talks and come on, we're going to get through this, and we've got a tough few weeks ahead of us, but we can do this. So we do. You're working with professionals that are used to being on film sets. They're used to long shoots. They're used to being in tough conditions. I had my head stick like kind of glued by the paramedic twice during that battle, with gashes and this and that. And, and we all ended up with sore fingers where swords would be grazing on knuckles and, everything was. I mean, getting trod on by horses really sucks, but it happens a lot. Getting hit with horses, galloping around and spinning in the middle every day.
Tormund in that battle is involved in that moment. We see where the Starks fighters are surrounded by the Boltons and with their shield, and everybody it's closing in on them, and everybody's suffocating, and Jon Snow gets like trampled and everything. How was that particular section of the battle put together?
The actual part of the battle that you're talking about, I remember it well. Actually, I was, can I say fortunate? Yeah, I was quite fortunate because Tormund was in that sequence, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
If it's the bit that you're talking about,
yeah,
the bit that I remember, and I was standing on top of a body pile, basically watching my actor to make sure that he was okay,
mm-hmm.
because I couldn't be there because I was in his costume.
Yeah.
And the stunt people that were around Kit, Jon Snow,
Yeah.
and the others, and and the main cast, really our job was to protect them. So we've got to make it look like a battle, but we've also got to be almost like human shields, because you've got hundreds of extras around them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just got to make sure that nobody gets too excited and ends up squashing them or hitting them with a sword or, this kind of thing. And the thing is, I mean, the swords are not sharp, but they're still sharp, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're not sharpened like knives, but they're still metal. And if you take one on the head or in the eye or anything like that, you get injured. So we really had to look after our cast. That was a big part of it.
Yeah, because like you said, like in that battle, there's people swinging swords at each other. There's riders smashing their horses into one another's, arrows flying, and of course there's an element of
absolutely.
There's an element of VFX to that when we watch it as viewers, but the beauty of TV and film magic is that a sequence like that looks like utter chaos to me when I watch it, but it was actually incredibly well choreographed to make sure that, like you said, everyone on set was actually safe. But like you mentioned, like you're also like in the midst of it. So how do you make it look energetic and dynamic without actually hurting someone?
Well, I think that's a combination of the stunt team and obviously amazing camera work. The way it was shot gives it its drama, along with the special effects creating, whether it's smoke, whether it's effects of whatever it is that's kind of adding to the atmosphere. And then obviously the stunt performers giving it 100%, so that if we, let's say, for example, the camera's on, let's say we're talking a Steadicam shot and the camera's in amongst the battle. If we, as performers, see that the camera's starting to come round to us and we need to attack somebody, you need to hit towards their head with 100%. Yeah. Now, obviously, we've rehearsed that particular hit, so they know that they're going to, at the perfect time, raise their shield, perhaps parry the blade. It's really about acting whilst fighting. It's giving it 100%. For me, what was amazing about that particular battle was just how excited everyone got about it when it came out. And even to this day, people reference that battle more than any other, I think.
If you look at even if you look at the show in general, it's still the one that sticks out. Even if The Long Night was great, or even if the stuff that happened in later seasons or prior seasons was great too, this one is the one that sticks out because of the stakes, because of what happens story-wise, but also because of how it looked and how it was really about immersing the viewer inside that battle through following Jon and following what was happening to him and all of that, but also just like rewatching it the other day, I was just like that. There's really a moment where you just feel as suffocated as the characters are.
Almost like you're in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that was key to it. I think that it was a combination of the actors and the stunt performers giving it 100%, and the extras, of course, giving it really 100%. And I think it was shot in such a way that it just brought the audience out of their seats and into the battle. It's almost like I think you watch it and you kind of feel tired
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. Like it's intense, isn't it?
Yeah. And as far as
Mm.
the filming conditions, like you mentioned, it's Northern Ireland. It can be 4 seasons in a day. Um, on
Hmm.
on the show, it looks miserable. Was it miserable all the way
Mm.
through, or did you had days where the weather was cooperating?
Well, cooperating in terms of maybe a bit less rain was amazing, but it was pretty miserable,
Yeah.
you know? It was, yeah. There were days where you would get soaking wet in the morning and then just have to stay wet all day because there was no way to dry thick costumes once they got wet when
Mm-hmm.
you're out there. And that makes it tough. It makes the costumes heavy. It's, yeah, when you're not fighting, you're cold. It's just, I think it's one of those things where the kind of the team effort really comes together. It was tough, but also very rewarding.
Is there something like when you talk about with other people that may not be in the industry and you talk about being on Game of Thrones and that episode in particular, are there things that people bring up to you like that they think it was fake, that they think it was VFX, and you're like, no, 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 we actually did that?
Oh, sometimes, yeah. The thing is, Game of Thrones has also become known for being quite a stunt heavy, do it for real show. I think people know that. I mean, obviously, there's aspects to Game of Thrones. We didn't tend to have too many real dragons on set
Yeah.
just because they can be tricky and temperamental, and they burn everything down, and
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, but in terms of the sequences that included fighting or horses or fire, those kind of things, it became known as sort of part of Game of Thrones that was all happening, that we
Mm-hmm.
did it.
So, like I said, you've been in loads of episodes of Game of Thrones, on top of Battle of the
Mm.
Bastards. Do you have a favorite memory from your time on the show?
Well, a good example of that is in the final season at King's Landing. We did what was actually apparently a world record burn because they set fire to 22 of us twice. So 44 burns, 22, then 22 straight away, each one twice. And that was a very epic shot to be part of. I'm very grateful. It sounds weird to say. I'm very grateful to say I was one of the guys that was burned. That sounds odd, right? But it was huge. It was amazing. It was epic. Even now, I look back at the photos from then and I think, wow, that was
Yeah.
pretty serious,
I mean, not everyone gets to be burnt by a dragon, so it's pretty cool.
There you go. Yeah. And we did in the season before, we did some amazing stuff in Seville where we did a dragon lands and burns pockets of us. And that time we did 19 burns.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me personally, yeah, the fire stuff on Game of Thrones topped anything else I've ever done fire wise. On the very last season, I suppose in a way that what was coming across from the stunt coordinator and the team was just that this is it. Let's go for it. Let's try and make everything bigger and badder than we've done before.
Mm-hmm.
Let's top everything else that we've done in the season.
Yeah.
So it was cool to be part of that and to have the opportunities to do that stuff.
And so, like I
Mm.
mentioned, you've done loads of Game of Thrones, but you've also been in House of the Dragon. So, how was that? Was it different from your experience in Game of Thrones? Did it feel like getting back in the saddle?
No, not for me. I didn't do a lot on House of Dragons, and the work I was doing on House of Dragons didn't feel as big. But also, in all fairness, House of Dragons was just getting going, and Game of Thrones was well established. When I look back at the stuff that you and I are talking about,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the biggest parts of Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
and House of Dragons, in a sense, was still building its story and characters, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely
Mm.
hasn't yet gone to the part where it's trying to top something that Game of Thrones
Yeah,
might have done.
Honestly, I don't think it will. But
Mhm.
it doesn't mean it won't do very well. It could do. I don't know. But I think Game of Thrones sits alone as Game of Thrones. I think Game of Thrones just broke the mold in so many ways that that's what people, when you talk about House of Dragons or Game of Thrones, I think Game of Thrones in itself will command that magic because it was new and fresh in so
Yeah.
many ways.
Have you
Mm.
experienced anything similar in terms of a TV production since?
No, not as big. Definitely not.
Mhm.
No. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like, in other ways, TV's still very exciting. I was thrilled to work on Killing Eve,
Yeah.
because I just thought it was I thought it was such a cool show, and there was amazing chemistry between the cast, and it also had something very special going for it, but in a completely different way from Game of Thrones, chalk and cheese, right?
It's the end of this episode of Once Upon a TV Time. Thank you so much for listening. Jonathan Cohen, thank you for agreeing to come down memory lane with me and taking some time out of your schedule to talk about Game of Thrones.
You're very welcome, Marine. And I realized, Battle of the Bastards is quite a long time ago. So I'm sorry if some of my answers to your questions might have sounded a bit vague, because I'm thinking, God, that was years ago already.
No, yeah, and I mean, that's fair. That's completely fair. Folks, I will be back soon with a new episode of Once Upon a TV Time and a new guest. Stay tuned, follow this podcast on social media for all the details, and until then, go watch some television.